Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners optimize income, pay less in tax, and invest prudently. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week on the show, we're talking about NPI, non-public information, or in other words, stuff about yourself you probably don't want to share with the general public, being your name and social security number, your date of birth, other stuff that would enable fraudsters to take actions that are not good financially for you. The reason that I wanted to cover this in this week's episode is we had a client recently who misplaced a document that she thought had non-public information on it, and she was concerned about the ramifications. And so when we met with her, we walked through the steps that she should take to lock down her accounts, lock down her credit, reach out to her financial institutions, and so on and so forth. And I thought it might be helpful on the podcast to walk through all those steps here as well, because I suspect that maybe some of you have been in that situation before where you're concerned somebody might have your social, or perhaps you've just wondered, if I am in that situation, what do I do? So we walk through that, all of that in this week's episode, in addition to the credit reporting system in the U.S. and why things are set up the way that they are. I hope you enjoy it.
Hey everyone, I need to interject quickly to remind you all that nothing found in today's episode or any other episode of Grow Money Business should be considered financial, investing, legal, tax, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and to deploy on your own terms. And before taking any actions on content found on the show, please do consult with your tax professional, your attorney, or your financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner, head on over to threeoakswealth.com to learn more about what we do in terms of financial planning and investments and how we help clients on an ongoing basis.
This week on the podcast, I want to talk for a few minutes about a client situation we recently had. And the reason that I thought it would make a lot of sense to share about this anonymously, obviously, is that I suspect a lot of our listeners have probably been in this similar situation in the past. This is maybe something a lot of you have thought about in the past, thought about what you might do if you were in this situation. And it really has to do with your NPI, or non-public information, your personal information, like your social security number, your birthday, your name, address, phone number, all that fun stuff. And so I think for today's episode, it would make the most sense just to lay out what happened in this recent meeting we had with the client, and what we suggest people typically do in that situation, and some other things to think about related to all this. And so here's was the situation. We were getting some account stuff done for a relatively new client, opening new accounts, moving money into the accounts, transferring from another brokerage firm, which is really commonplace, happens all the time. Some of these forms we can sign electronically. Some of these forms we can't. And what that means is that our clients either need to print out the forms that we send them securely through some secure gateway like a vault, or we mail them via secure USPS the forms for them to sign and then return to us in a pre-stamped envelope. Now, this person, so we're in the middle of this account stuff. This person didn't have handy access to a printer, and so we just decided to mail the forms to them. They had all the forms ready to be signed and then returned to us, but they got mixed up, something happened, and they misplaced one of these forms. And so on these forms, it includes a lot of personal information, like your name and your address and your social security number, your birth date, and other things that you don't want other people to have for a variety of reasons. And so the handling of the form was all done properly, but our client just misplaced it. And they couldn't remember whether they had thought that this one form was unimportant and just tossed it in the trash, or whether they had left it maybe in the trunk of their car and it got buried and lumped in with something else, or whether they just left it on a park bench somewhere. And they were concerned about the security of all of their finances, as they should be, right? So I thought it would make sense to just walk through what you probably want to think about if you're in this situation, because all that personal information that we don't want other people to have, we don't want other people to have it for a reason. And so maybe just to start, we'll list out what other people could potentially do with that information. Now, first off, if somebody has your name and your birth date and your address and your social security number, they can go take out loans in your name. Now, what that means is, if a fraudster gets a hold of this, somebody who really wants to use it to their advantage, they might go online and try to take out a credit card in your name first of all, and then have that credit card mailed to their address. So now they have a credit card in the name of John Smith. It might have a credit limit of, I don't know, a few thousand, maybe $10,000 on it. And then guess what happens? They run out to the store and they buy a whole bunch of stuff. And you may or may not know about it because they listed their address. You may or may not know about it immediately, I should say, because they listed their address on or PO box or whatever on the application. Maybe they can go take out a loan to buy something else, like a car or something. There has been federal legislation passed in the last couple decades surrounding this, and as I understand it, it's the bank's responsibility at this point. And if somebody jumps through those hoops, opens a credit card in your name, and spends a whole bunch of money on, puts a whole bunch of transactions on the card. My current understanding, I'm not 100% sure this is accurate, but my current understanding is that you're only responsible for the first $50, and the bank or the lender is responsible for the balance beyond that. That being said, it's still a nuisance. It's still something that you have to deal with. It's still something that needs to be rectified so that doesn't, this transaction, this credit card, all those debts don't show up on your credit report. So that's one thing somebody can do. Another thing that somebody can do is if you're eligible to receive any kind of Social Security benefit, and that could be because you're maybe in your mid 60s but haven't filed for your own benefits yet, or maybe um, you're younger than that, but you were married for more than 10 years to somebody who is in their 60s. And in that case, you can file for Social Security benefits based off your ex-spouse's record. If you were married for 10 years or longer, once you turn 60 years old, if you have minor kids at home and are a widow or a widower, you can collect benefits in that manner too. Long story short, if somebody has your information, they can file for your Social Security benefits and have a check from the Social Security Administration directed to them instead of you, when you should be the one collecting the check. And as we've covered on the show over the last several years, the earlier that you collect your benefits, the lower the amount of the check. And whereas if somebody takes a credit card out in your name and you have to rectify that with the bank, that's the bank's responsibility. This kind of fraud happens all the time, right? And banks are, in my experience, relatively efficient at cleaning that mess up on your behalf. The Social Security Administration is a different animal. This government agency is in complete shambles right now. I'll give you a little bit of foreshadowing. I just recorded an episode about Social Security and its shortcomings with somebody who's really studied this in detail, and that agency has all sorts of problems. That episode is going to air maybe a month, maybe 6 weeks from when this episode does. But just to give you some forewarning, the Social Security Administration and your local Social Security office may or may not be able to rectify that for you. And that's an issue, right? So you want to monitor if you have personal information that you've lost or you think might be compromised. You want to monitor your credit. You want to monitor your Social Security. You also probably want to change the password and usernames for banks and your existing credit cards and your investment accounts and all of the above. That's good practice to do periodically anyway. But if somebody has your name and your birth date and your Social Security number, then they can call up the bank and say, hi, I'm John Smith. I would like to take a withdrawal of $25,000 that is in my account. And the representative at the bank is obligated to verify this fraudster's identity with a couple of personal questions. Banking institutions today are getting a little bit better at this. Now, when we have to verify our clients at banks and other institutions, they ask a lot of random questions. They might ask for your birth date. They might ask for like approximate account balance. They might ask for your address or the last four of your social or your mother's maiden name or some rotating combination of all that stuff. And so for that reason, if somebody just has your address, your birth date, and your social, I think it's kind of unlikely they're going to be able to access your bank accounts, but you never know. It's not impossible. So that's a good reason to, at minimum, change your password on your bank and investment accounts. But also, you might want to reach out to the bank and just let them know, hey, I think my information might have been compromised. Can we put some additional security measures in place to make sure no fraudster comes in and pretends to be me and takes a bunch of money out? If a fraudster is able to take money out of the bank because they pretended to be you, I don't know whether that's the bank's responsibility or yours, to be perfectly honest. It's your responsibility to notify the bank that your information might be compromised, and then let them suggest what additional measures you might want to take to make sure that nobody runs down to the bank and takes all your money out. So those are a few things to do to start. You want to monitor your credit. You want to monitor your Social Security statements, and you want to notify your banks and change banks and brokerages and change all your passwords. Now, on top of that, I think what you probably want to do is freeze your credit entirely. And we've been talking about this in our office quite a bit, actually, over the last couple months. But the the idea here is there are 3 credit reporting agencies in the U.S.: TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. And these credit rating agencies collect all sorts of information about you and me and our credit histories with regard to making loan payments on time, paying off debts. If we were ever late making like a mortgage or an auto or credit card payment, it's going to be on that report in most circumstances. And that information is what comprises our credit score. So when it comes time to take out a new loan of something, say you want to go buy a house, that's one of the first things that they're going to look at is how creditworthy are you? What's your responsibility around debt? And have you ever had any problems making payments in the past? And the credit reporting agencies are the organizations that collect all this information and produce the reports, which is a very lucrative business for them. Well, if you don't do anything, then your credit and that information is going to be available to anybody. And so if a fraudster gets your information and they walk down to the bank and they want to open a credit card at that bank in your name, the bank is going to ping the credit reporting agencies and request information about your background. And then they'll take that information and make a decision on how much of a limit to put on that credit card, or whether they're going to issue a credit card in the first place, right? So if you don't do anything, that line of communication between the bank and the credit reporting agencies is just open all the time. And if you remember back to like when you moved out on your own for the first time and you had to set up utilities, and maybe you had like a cable TV subscription or something like that, or your phone plans, Verizon and AT&T do this too. They want to make sure that you can pay your bills as well. So they'll check your credit before you open an account with them for the first time. So this is an avenue, this being somebody taking the information you left on a park bench down to the bank, opening a credit card in your name. They can do that because as long as the credit reporting agencies are willing to furnish your background, your credit history to the bank. But as part of a piece of legislation, this is probably maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, as a result of a hack at these reporting agencies that I'll get into here in just a minute. These three reporting agencies are legally compelled to allow you to freeze your credit and totally lock it down. And so what that means is you would reach out to these credit reporting agencies. It's pretty easy to do online. Before this federal legislation, it was not easy to do online and sometimes cost you money. But now it's relatively easy through a quick Google search. You reach out to them, you confirm your identity, and you instruct them to freeze your credit. And what that means is that any credit inquiry is denied by the reporting agencies. And so if you freeze your credit and then you turn around and go down to the auto dealership and want to buy a fancy Mercedes and request a loan to buy the Mercedes, the loan officer, the salesman will be happy to sell it to you. The loan officer will be happy to lend you the money. They're going to turn around and pull your credit report to understand what terms they can offer. And then they're going to have that request denied. The request to get information from the credit rating agency will be just flat denied because your credit's frozen. And they'll come back to you in their fancy waiting room and say, well, sorry, we need you to lift your credit freeze before we can access your information and come up with some terms. And so again, the default, if you do nothing, is your credit information is available to anybody, really. And if you're proactive and freeze your credit, it's unavailable to anybody. And if you freeze your credit and then later want to go borrow some money to buy something, you have to reach out proactively to the credit reporting agencies, all three of them probably, and temporarily lift the freeze. The last time I did this, I lifted it for, it's because we bought a house a couple of years ago. I lifted it for a period of 48 or 72 hours or something like that. So I logged into each of the three reporting agencies one time. They lifted the freeze for a couple of days, and then they automatically reimposed it after that. So freeze was lifted. The lenders did what they do. They accessed my credit reports and everything, and then the freeze was reinstated. And honestly, this is a much, much better default. This is a much better way for people to fly who don't need to consistently access new lines of credit. And I think most of us in our office have gone this route of freezing our credit. I don't think everybody has. And I think that, again, if you're in a position to where you're not making consistent purchases, to where you have to take out new credit lines, it's probably better for you just to lock it down and freeze it so nobody can access your information at any point. And in our client situation, she owns a house and has for a long time. She has an auto loan and doesn't plan to take another one out. She has a couple credit cards. She doesn't need any new credit cards. Keep in mind that this does not mean if you freeze your credit that your credit cards are going to all of a sudden not work. Your current credit lines will remain intact. It's just that requests for a new credit card or new credit will at that point be denied, right? So this makes a lot of sense for our client. And so again, the three reporting agencies, TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. If you Google search TransUnion freeze my credit, Equifax freeze my credit, Experian freeze my credit, there will be a web page that comes up that walks you through the steps to do that. They'll want to verify that you are who you say you are. So you have to answer a whole bunch of personal questions. Which of these 6 automobiles have you ever owned in the past? And they'll go back 25 years if they need to. Which of these addresses looks familiar to you as places that you've lived in the past? Those kinds of questions to make sure it's absolutely you. Then you establish a username and sometimes a PIN number or password, something like that. Make sure that you keep all that in a very secure spot. Make sure that you don't lose it. Make sure nobody else gets it. Because that's the PIN number you'll use to get back into the credit reporting agency site and temporarily lift the freeze if you need to. If you lose the PIN number, you'll be able to retrieve it and get in somehow, but it's probably going to require a lot of time on the phone, and they will ask you probably dozens of questions at that point to confirm that you are who you say you are, which is good. It's for your protection. Just know that it's something you don't want to lose. So in our client situation, we suggested that that they reach out to the 3 credit reporting agencies, freeze their credit, lock it down. She doesn't have any immediate need for credit. It just made a whole lot of sense. Now, she's also the age where she could have collected Social Security benefits, but she hasn't yet. So the other thing that we need to do is monitor her Social Security statement and make sure that nobody else out there, no fraudster out there in the world, is filing for her benefits before she wants to herself. And that's done by retrieving your Social Security statement every year. It's myssa.gov. We'll link to all this stuff in the show notes. Once a year, you log in, you pull your report, and you just confirm that all the information is accurate. And if you haven't filed for benefits, it shows that you haven't filed for benefits yet. And then on top of that, change your passwords to your bank and your brokerage account information. Probably want to call them to let them know I misplaced some documents. I just want to see what extra measures we can take to lock down my account, make sure nobody walks away with money. So those are the few things that make a whole lot of sense. Now, the other portion of this that I wanted to comment on in this episode is that this is kind of an interesting way that our financial system is set up, is that we don't proactively do anything before the credit reporting agencies just start tracking our history and our data. Anytime we borrow money, anytime we set up utilities or phones or anything like that, they just kind of start tracking them. There's an information sharing as part of the agreements you sign to transact with any of those vendors, utility companies, phone companies, any of those things. Part of your agreement is to enable them to share information with these credit reporting agencies. And there's really nothing that we can do about it. And so what happens is that through no action of our own, there's this organization out there that's just collecting tons and tons of financial information about each of us. And this sounds like, oh yeah, of course they are. I mean, the internet these days, they're tracking everything that we do. My social media is tracking each millisecond that I spend on each page. They're tracking that and figuring out what kind of ads to put in front of me. This is all kind of common knowledge. But with social media accounts and internet activity, there are ways to opt out of that. And one of them is just to put your phone down and log out of your computer. But for the financial tracking through the credit reporting agencies, you really cannot buy a house without borrowing a whole bunch of money. And the lender is not going to lend you any cash before seeing what your credit history looks like. You're really forced through this protocol in order to engage in any kind of ordinary lifestyle in this day and age, right? So the credit reporting agencies are collecting information about us. They're open. That access is just open if we don't take action proactively and freeze the accounts. And so we have these 3 big organizations, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, that are just collecting more and more information about everybody's financial activities. And they have very little oversight and real responsibility to keep that information secure. And I say that because back in 2017, Equifax, one of these 3 credit reporting agencies, got hacked in a big way. We talked about it on the podcast here a few years ago. If this headline rings a bell, this was a big deal. The personal information of 143 million Americans was compromised in this hack, which is almost half of the population. That's a big deal. And nobody even opened an account with Equifax Nobody had, a lot of these 143 million probably had no idea that their information was being stored there. Nevertheless, the information was, and it was compromised in this hack. And so there's, as you can imagine, legislative action. This is the piece of legislation I mentioned that compelled the credit reporting agencies to now give us access to easier access to freeze our credit. You can also access your credit report, your credit history through each of these three reporting agencies once a year for free with no cost, right? This is where we get annualcreditreport.gov from. There used to be a website called freecreditreport.com. They had all these catchy TV ads and all that stuff. That's actually not free. When you go to freecreditreport.com, I don't even know if it still exists, to be honest. You have to pay them a fee for their credit monitoring services, which I'll get to here in just a second. I'm pretty sure it's annualcreditreport.gov, and I'll confirm the website and put it in the show notes, is where you want to go to retrieve the history that these reporting agencies have on an annual basis. Nevertheless, one of these things got hacked. And so the government got involved through the and I want to say this was the Fair Credit Reporting Act. That name seems to ring a bell for me. But the government got involved. There were class action suits and all that. And as part of the resolution, Experian agreed to provide free credit monitoring to anybody who was afflicted by the hack. So if you had your information compromised, there was this website that you went to check to see if whether your information was compromised, and if it was, they offer you free credit monitoring for like a year, which to me was the biggest BS loophole to get out of this thing. People they took no action in the first place, yet this organization was tracking everything that they did financially. That information got out, and now all the information is compromised, and the best they can do is offer free credit monitoring, which is kind of a ridiculous product in the first place. So that's where we're at. What I wanted to do in this episode today was just run through this situation, run through a few thoughts about credit reporting in general, so a few proactive steps you might want to take just in general, and that's freeze your credit if you don't need new credit anytime soon. It's just generally a good principle, and it'll probably take you about 15 minutes to do, and it doesn't cost anything. And if you're in a situation like this, these are the steps that I would suggest you consider taking. But then on top of that, just the fact that the way that our financial system is set up, a lot of it is based on credit. And it's totally understandable that a lender would want to know about your credit history through some objective source. I just think that the reporting agencies themselves need more regulatory oversight. This was a really big deal, this hack. And I think that Equifax really got off easy back in 2017 because, again, the resolution included free credit monitoring for 1 year. Now, what is that? There are all sorts of free, well, maybe not free, but credit monitoring services out there like Credit Karma and a bunch of others. To be honest, I don't know all the features of what Credit Karma does, but I know that one of them is that they'll monitor your credit for you. So they track your score, right? Well, it's pretty easy to track your score yourself because these three agencies have to give you a free report every single year. So that's not that hard to do. You go to the website that we're going to link to in the show notes, just pull the report yourself and look at what they have for history. Now, sometimes they make a mistake and they get your history wrong, or sometimes a lender will put something in a report that is abusive or inaccurate or something like that. I had an old apartment complex that I apologize if anybody's heard the story before, but I used to live in Denver right out of grad school, and I rented an apartment, and I had a roommate who wanted to like paint one of the walls. And so we walked down to the leasing office and asked the management, hey, what does it say surrounding paint on the walls. Can we paint this thing, number one? And if we do we need to paint it back once they move out? They say, yeah, that's no problem. It's in the lease. You can paint the wall, and then when you move out, we repaint every time anyway, so you don't need to paint it back. And we kind of took their word for it instead of actually reading the lease. We're early 20s, right? Probably a kind of a dumb thing to do, but we did it. And so the wall got painted. I was indifferent. The roommate wanted to do this. I was indifferent. We move out like a year later, and I don't think twice about it. Well, 2 years after that, I had a claim from the apartment complex on my credit report. And after hours and hours of tracking this down, it was because maybe a different manager had a different opinion of it, or maybe the person we spoke with was just mistaken or didn't have the authority to say what they did. They did not want the wall painted, or at least want it painted back after we moved out. And so they wanted to assess a fine for that, and they claimed to have reached out to me. I never heard from them a single time in writing or over the phone, and they claimed that they couldn't find me, and so they sold that debt to a debt collector, and it went uncollected for a couple of years. Well, anyway, it was I challenged it on the credit report because what they were claiming was entirely inaccurate, and after a couple of tries, I actually won. So if you pull your credit report and there's something on there you don't agree with, you can challenge these things. And so not all the time. It might not be easy. It might take some time out of your week, but you can sometimes win these appeals and these challenges. So all you need to do is once a year. This should be part of your annual protocol. Once a year, just pull the reports for free and confirm the history. And if you're somebody who has not a history of not so great credit, or you want to improve your credit to get better terms on a loan coming up, you want to buy a house, you need to improve your credit. It's the stuff that you need to do is relatively basic. Doing that stuff is not always easy, but the stuff you need to do is relatively basic, and you don't need to pay for some service to give you tips to improve your credit. The steps you need to take are, number one, improve your debt to income ratio. And so of the money that you have coming in each month, how much of that money is going towards debt payments? The better your debt to income ratio, meaning the lower your debt as a percentage of your monthly income, the better your credit score. If you have a history of being late on payments or missing payments, that's going to be a demerit too. And quite obviously, if you've missed payments in the past, if that's dragging down your score, then you need to make payments, at least minimum payments, on time, because doing so will improve your track record and boost your score. Those are two things right off the bat. Debt utilization is another one. So if you have a credit card with a limit of $10,000 on it, and that credit card consistently has a balance each month of $8,000, lenders don't like that as much as if you had a balance of $1,000. Because that tells them that you're very responsible with credit. If you're using a lower percentage of the debt available to you, the lower the percentage, the higher your score in general. So those are a few things. We had a guest on the show here a few months back. It may have been like early this year, I can't remember when, who knew a little bit more about how the scores are built and what percentage of your score is related to each of these things. All this stuff is available online. I'm, just kind of shooting at the hip here today, and I can't recall how much of your score is related to each of these factors. But if you're trying to improve your score, if I were in your shoes, I would just look up what the score is built from, and then I would pull the reports myself and just glance at them. It's not going to take that much time. All that to say, I don't really believe in these credit reporting services. It's something that's easy to do on your own. And the fact that Equifax got away with offering that as a resolution to all the afflicted customers They're not even customers. All the afflicted citizens whose information that they had without their consent is kind of ridiculous. So that's where we're at. This is unfortunately just an element of the system that we're stuck with. But the proactive thing that we can do about it is just lock it down. They're going to keep track of your financial records, your history of managing debt over time, whether we like it or not. But we can lock down other people's access to those, which has some benefit if your personal information is compromised and some fraudster wants to go borrow money in your name. So that's about it for today. Hope this was helpful. Hope everybody's having a good holiday season, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners optimize income, pay less in tax, and invest prudently. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements, and feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.